what they clearly request is end-to-end and seamless integration of the data in the relevant processes and other data pools.
If you want to cover 100%, it's not a self-running thing. You need to do a monitoring and you need to understand the system and the behavior of your organization.
Welcome to a new episode of Inside Supply Chain. My name is Thomas. I'm here at SupplyOn, responsible for the solutions in the area of supplier management, of strategic sourcing, and supplier quality management. And I'm today here together with my colleague Florian.
Hello, Thomas. So my name is Florian, and I'm responsible for one of the biggest industrial clients in our company. And we are covering the different areas from purchasing, quality, logistics, and supply chain management.
So this is also a huge and broad variety of processes that you are talking about. So is there a kind of an overall topic which is actually in discussion with the customers for these processes?
Yeah, Thomas. So we are talking currently about the topic 100%.
And 100% of what?
100% digital and automated.
So in the year 2023, is this really still a challenge?
Yeah, definitely it is. The last 20% are the most difficult ones. And Thomas, let's see, the environment of our clients is very complex. So the corporations we work with are operating in more than 60 countries. We are talking about more than 20 different languages. We are talking about millions of transactions per year. And I mean, the ones where you have steady business, the connection to reach is not that difficult. But the ones where you are only sporadic in contact, those are the difficult ones, and those are representing the 20%.
That sounds really interesting. But maybe before starting to discuss about the solution, Florian, can you maybe give a short insight into what actually the problem is by not having these last 20% already covered?
Yeah. So the problem is basically that you need to have different channels. So for example, phone, fax, email, and also the systems. And if you have these different input channels, you can't expect, let's say, the same process quality and the same process efficiency also when it comes to the integration into internal systems.
Yeah, clear, of course, because then you have for different suppliers, you use different communication channels and you always need to manage them. Yeah? And I can also imagine that there are kind of different compliance levels and security levels achieved on the different layers or communication channels.
Yeah, definitely. For example, all the transactions which are coming via the SupplyOn platform are on a very high security standard. And all the other channels are more or less unsecure at that point. And we all know that security of information, also in terms of all the global developments, are very important at that time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I can also imagine that it's maybe also a certain problem that it's not quite clear, especially in the central organizations of huge global acting industry companies, to have a certain transparency about who is using what, with which customer or with which supplier and so on.
Definitely that's the case. And what we had in the past, what was typical also for the IT industry, is that you set up a system, you set up a functionality, and but most of them don't care at the very end about the usage. And but the usage is a very important driver for the business case of the companies.
Okay, understand, yeah.
But what we see currently is that this is changing. because due to the different requirements we see in the market, also from compliance, from environmental, social, and governmental perspective, companies see that they need to reach 100% digital input channel, which is then also automated and at the very end secure.
Yeah, I can imagine that, because I discussed a lot about that in the last weeks and months with customers also. And they clearly indicated that especially those ESG requirements, they are not only relevant for the strategic suppliers, but they are relevant for the complete supply chain.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So therefore, definitely, there is a kind of a solution necessary how our customers are able to access all of their complete supply base.
Right. And in the past, it worked basically in the following structure. The companies selected suppliers which they proactively wanted to onboard, and then the supplier were connected. And as we call it for the short and middle tail, that worked fine. But in the long tail, the problem is that rarely there are coming transactions, maybe one time as in 6 months, or one time in 12 months, or one time in 15 months. So and at that time, you cannot be sure that the person you onboarded 12 months ago is still the right contact person in the company. On the other hand, when you see the companies who are requesting information from their supplier, people are very busy there. So, and they want to just type in the request, and they expect that everything works. And basically, if just wrong contact data leads to the situation that it's not working, they might use a different channel like email or phone.
Yeah. Or even if it's just complex and system returns with some error messages or something like that, they are definitely directly annoyed and they use the old-fashioned communication channels like using email or dialing via phone because they then at the end seem to be quite flexible and reliable somehow, and they are used to.
But they are not backend integrated, so no automation there. You have the problem of, let's say, typos, wrong data collection, and also additional effort for the one who's then typing in the data.
Yeah, and this is something we have not discussed about yet. So especially the topic which you just meant, like integrating the data which was entered by the supplier in the collaboration, then automatically into the corresponding backend system.
Right.
Which is a very important thing from my point of view.
So the reason why it's so important is that, if you're collecting data on a small range, then the format doesn't really matter. What we are talking about are environments of big corporations. We talk about of millions transactions. And therefore, you need to have, let's say, structured data in a certain format to really enable a backend integrated automation, and also to reduce the quality checks from the person who are receiving the data, and to distribute the data in the different data lakes within the large corporations to reuse it in different ways and for different purposes.
Yeah. I also know these requirements from discussions with several customers that we actually have, that they said, today we really need to get on another level to enable the complete organization to cover the rising complexity that we have. Especially, you also mentioned ESG before, which is actually really a struggle in the organizations, how to catch up with all of these upcoming requirements and so on. And what they clearly request is end-to-end and seamless integration of the data in the relevant processes and other data pools. And therefore, wherever we have discussions with customer, this is a basic requirement that they have, that data is always available and is always definitely integrated and spread into all of the different systems where it is necessary. Yeah, completely understand that.
When we thought about the whole concept, we established, let's say, 3+1 design principles for the new, let's say, we call it long tail approach. And the first principle is that we are saying we establish a connection only in the moment we really need it. So we call it a transactional approach. That's the first principle. The second principle is that we make the person who is requiring the information responsible to provide the right information. So we call it requester principle. That means also, for example, when you write a postcard, you're responsible to write the right address on the postcard, and you can't make the postal office responsible for that. And the third principle is that we are radically deleting this transaction contact data after the transaction is finished. And for the reason that we are forcing the next person who are starting a transaction to type in again new, fresh, and valid data.
Yeah. And I think this is really at the end the key to solve this problem. That because it's somehow comparable to email. So because if you would use such this old communication channel like email, in the point of this transaction start, the one who is starting the transaction, like for example the purchaser on the customer side, he would need to know the email address of the contact person on the supplier side anyhow.
Right.
And what we are trying to do, or what we are doing, is that we transfer exactly that logic into a system, into a collaboration platform at SupplyOn, where this is the trigger to start the collaboration with the supplier with exactly the same information need, but at the end with the possibility to have the collaboration then completely in the system, and with the possibility to bring it even back, the responses back into the backend system on the customer side. Yeah.
Exactly, and this leads to the, as I said before, we have 3+1. The last, let's say, important pillar for the long tail is to build up usage monitoring, so that all the time you know exactly where are transactions bypassed, where are systems are used, and based on that learning, you can either improve the system or, let's say, change the behavior of the organization. Yeah? If you want to cover 100%, it's not a self-running thing. You need to do a monitoring, and you need to understand the system and the behavior of your organization.
Yeah, because, and this is also something which turned out in the discussions we internally had, and also with the customer on the specific that topic now, and also on this new solution approach. So the one thing is that, of course, by this long tail idea or solution idea, we now have a solution to cover these 20% of gap which we actually have. But the other thing, which is it has the same importance from my point of view, is that by having that, we also reduce the excuses of the users at the end to not use the defined and established tools for the digitalization. And by reducing the excuses, and of course also the hurdles of using these tools, I'm completely convinced that it is much easier at the end, based on the transparency that you just mentioned, to furthermore establish a higher grade of digitalization also on the customer side, where all of the transactions begin. So it means at the end that we finally have a solution available for the digitalization of the rest to achieve the 100%, including the automation. And it's quite easy. It's just an access for the suppliers who need to collaborate with a token and a link. So there is no need for complex company registration, and there is also no fees for the suppliers. So a lot of the problems that have been discussed for the suppliers in the long tail are definitely solved with that solution. Yeah,
I would totally agree. And I mean, if this topic sounds now interesting to you, just get in touch with us to, let's say, discuss your individual situation at your corporation. And thank you for joining us today at this episode of Inside Supply Chain. And have a good time and see you hopefully soon on this channel.